near COVID-19 capacity or have limited bed and ICU availability. All 4 members of the Pend Oreille Health Department say they will resign on November 27th due to lack of support from the county on coronavirus response. For Montana PBS News Brief, I'm Jordan Johnson.
In 2020, Montanans voted in record numbers, and they made their choices clear. We've got new data from the Carroll College exit polls to dive deeper into the Republican sweep and Montanans' voting trends.
Well, we went Republican.
We're trying to meet voters where they're at.
The global pandemic presented new obstacles to voting and counting the ballots. We'll go behind the scenes to see how Montana handled the challenges.
It doesn't compare to anything in the past.
Plus, just how polarized is the state's electorate?
There's no seeing eye to eye anymore.
We'll get voters' opinions. All that and more will give us insight into how Montanans voted.
Production support was provided by the Greater Montana Foundation, encouraging communication on issues, trends, and values of importance to Montanans.
Good evening and welcome to Montana PBS and our continuing political coverage. I'm John Twiggs. Well, it's 2020, so why would we expect anything ordinary this election cycle? We've gotten Montana voting totals that we've never seen before, nearly an 81% voter turnout rate, and a single-party sweep that hasn't happened in over 80 years. So tonight we'll dig into the numbers and try to provide insight. We've got a great panel to help with analysis. Dr. Christina Barsky from the University of Montana is with us, and Dr. Alex Street from Carroll College. Welcome to you both. Let's start with just a quick recap of things. Actually, on behalf of all Montanans, I wanted to ask you about the nightmare of campaign advertising that's going on, but we only have half an hour, so we're going to go ahead and stick to the subject here. So Christina, let's start with you and the idea of the voting process and all that's been going on. You've been studying that. How do you think that went?
I think it was a great success. I mean, Montanans are familiar with vote by mail. They had the options by county to decide how our elections were going to be run. And so 80% turnout across the state says to me that we know what we're doing.
And Alex, we talk about the actual storyline with the voting results, and obviously the Montana Republican Party, huge night for them. What else caught your attention?
I think that is the big story, and I think it's partly a change that the Montana has gone from being a state we talk about as purple, as electing a mix of Republicans and Democrats, and now this is the year when party polarization arrived in Montana. It's been happening nationwide, and we finally got to the point where almost every voter is either Republican all the time or Democrat all the time. We're not getting a lot of that split ticket voting. And as a result, you get one party, the bigger party in the state, just sweeping the board.
A lot to dig into, and we're going to do that this evening. We've got new data tonight from the Carroll College exit poll, over 500 registered voters in 3 key counties that we're focusing on this evening: Yellowstone, Lewis and Clark, and Cascade. We'll get to that in a moment. First, let's begin with the top race, the U.S. Senate. It was the most money, the most attention, and it was a toss-up all the way going to election night. And of course, as you can see, it was not a toss-up at all. Steve Daines with a convincing double-digit win over Steve Bullock. Very impressive as he leads the way at the top of the ticket. And how he got there was very interesting as well. And we start with the old bellwether county, and that is Cascade County, almost a mirror image in terms of the result there, 55-44. He wins it by 11. Steve Bullock won that county in 2016, as that was a precursor to his victory there in a second term for governor, but this time it belongs to Steve Daines. And Daines ran strongly, not only in that county, but he ran strongly in some blue counties as well, the Lewis and Clark County results. He did not win here, but he was within 1,400 votes of Steve Bullock's home county. This is a county that Bullock rolled through in 2016 by 8,000 votes on his way to victory there. So again, very impressive from Steve Daines. Now, as far as the exit polling results go, this was very telling indeed. For Steve Bullock, it was the task of trying to peel away Trump voters. He was very successful in 2016. In fact, that's the only victory for a Democrat in the last 2 presidential cycles in a statewide race, because he was so effective at doing that. And as you can see in 2020, not nearly as effective, not even a third of those voters coming to him. So Alex, this is just the basic math of things, I guess. You have more Republicans than Democrats in the state, and you simply have to get that done, don't you?
Yeah, and in a state and in a country that is getting increasingly polarized, it's just harder and harder to do it. And we finally gotten to the point where it seems the individual candidate just doesn't matter as much. So we see Bullock doing very similarly. He's not doing much better in these races than Williams or Cooney or even some of the lower profile Democrats running for some of the statewide positions in the Secretary of State's office or Attorney General, they basically all did about the same. And it's because most voters are just voting all Republican or all Democrat, and there's more Republicans in the state, and so the individual candidates don't seem to matter as much.
Christina, you lived over in Great Falls for a number of years. We keep referring to Cascade County as that bellwether county, and it has been really for several election cycles. What is it about Cascade County, and will that continue?
Yeah, great question. I think, one of the things we did see in Cascade was a sweep of Republicans through the local district, right? So we also saw Republicans winning state Senate and state House seats. I think Great Falls and the Cascade County is really different than the other counties that we'll be talking about this evening. It's the only one that's losing population. It's declining in size. And so as we see the edge of the silver tsunami, right, retirees, there's a big Air Force base there, the smelter closed in the 70s, the population's aging, and with that we're seeing an increasing number of Republican voters.
Well, we'll see how that county plays out in another big race, and that, of course, was the race for governor. Greg Gianforte making his second try at that, and this time he was very successful. Again, the polling leading up to this, maybe 5-6 points up in that, and he does double that as he wins it by a dozen points over Mike Cooney in that race. Now, the question is for Gianforte, how can he effectively do better in the key counties that he struggled with in 2016. And as you'll see in Yellowstone County, which was very important, in 2016 he barely managed to squeak out a win there by less than 500 votes, and that was very telling as that's part of the Democrat strategy, to stay close in that county and then make it up someplace else. Well, no such thing in 2020. He wins it by over 17,000 votes. So Gianforte very strong in Yellowstone County. And then, of course, back to our bellwether county in Cascade, it told a different story. It was actually a harbinger of what was going to happen in both races. In 2016, he loses it by 3,600 votes and loses the race, and almost a 10,000 vote swing for Gianforte in Cascade County as he wins it by 6,200 to pick up the victory and become the next governor for the state of Montana. And Alex, another exit polling number that came out of that, of course, and you referenced this earlier, Mike Cooney, he struggled. I think he only got 6% of Trump voters that he was able to peel off. So back to your point, I guess it didn't really matter who it was just a task that was not going to happen.
Yeah, they didn't perform that differently. And the other thing that we've seen is that a lot of these statewide Republicans do seem to have benefited from this very high turnout. And the fact that President Trump being on the ballot seems to have pulled a lot of people into the electorate who haven't always been regular voters. You referred earlier to the 80%, 81% turnout. That's calculated among people who are registered. And I think it's kind of useful, but it's kind of misleading in the sense that we're missing out the fact that there's a whole big other chunk of people who aren't even registered. But when you include those people as well, Montana was around 72% this year, which is just really high. That's just really big turnout. The president is this polarizing figure, and he's pulled some people who've normally not been that engaged with politics, and they've come in, and that's helped statewide Republican politicians.
Yeah. Christina, let's talk about President Trump, because in addition to driving up that turnout for President Trump, he received 62,000 more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016. So a lot more people coming out, a lot of them voting for him. So how big of a factor do you think President Trump was in terms of, I guess, coattails in Montana?
I think a pretty big factor, and I also think we have to keep in mind this is like the coronavirus election, right? So we have people that are concerned about change and feeling uncertain, and sticking with the same person they elected last time doesn't seem that out of character if we're already concerned about what's happening around us.
Well, it has certainly been a theme that we've hit on already, and that is, of course, partisan politics in Montana. How partisan has it gotten? Well, even first-time voters are noticing. We partnered with Missoula Big Sky High School in our student reporting lab and asked young voters what they noticed about the tone of politics today.
There's no seeing eye to eye anymore, it feels, for people. Like, a lot of partisanship has infected our lives to the point where we can't have a conversation with someone with varying political views and keep it civil. And when we do, someone comes away feeling smug. Like, everyone comes from a conversation like, I won. I won this conversation for the Democrats. I won this conversation for the Republicans. Not like you are two people who are both being royally screwed over by a political system.
Everything is very split down the middle between whether or not you're conservative or you're liberal. And because of that, we have the issue of people are not communicating to each other as individuals. We're having very split dinner conversations, and Things like that is just toxic for what we want in the United States because we're supposed to be one people.
It's really, you're on this side or that side, and not a lot of people are really in the middle.
That's why I actually don't very often talk about politics with my friends, because I'm not actually positive if I'm gonna touch a nerve or if I'm gonna end up upsetting them in any way, shape, or form.
Very wise high school seniors who are right on point with that, and these probably are the most telling numbers that came out of the exit poll here, and that is the idea of splitting the ticket and just how partisan things have gotten. As you can see, it was well over half in 2016 that during a presidential election with all those choices on the ballot, that at least one time going over to the other party. So 56% there, and it's a 21% drop to 2020, an amazing number that way. As for Democrats, they were less likely to split the ticket back in 2016, but still a significant drop of 17% in 2020. And then the biggest number and most important number to the results this year, what did the Republicans do? And you can see half the Republicans were splitting the ticket in 2016, somewhere up and down along that long ballot, and 27% drop, so less than 1 in 4 this year willing to split that ticket. And so this really drives home the point, I think, of what you've been talking about all along. And so I guess, first of all, Alex, say it ain't so, because we pride ourselves in Montana on being ticket splitters and not being so much beholden to one single party. Is this changing?
I think it is, and it's been happening nationwide. In some ways, it's not such a surprise that it's happening here too. We ask this very broad version of this question, referring to all the races, all the statewide and the local legislative races. And a lot of people like the idea of being independent. People generally don't like political parties. And so they like the idea that they're kind of picking and choosing. But that doesn't work so well in an era where politics is much more about social identities and really not as much about policy. I think we saw that in those high school students. They're talking about how much you can hurt people's feelings. You can't hurt people's feelings so much in a policy disagreement, but if you're talking about their identity and who they are and who you are, that becomes much more painful potentially, and potentially much more divisive. And that's the trend that we're seeing nationwide, and I think it really has accelerated even over the last 4 years.
Christina, we are living in a state, obviously, with a changing population, the age of our population. Do you think those are the biggest factors, and especially going forward, of what this is going to look like?
I think those are really significant factors, but I think Alex brings up a really important point as well. You know, often in Montana, we feel like we're looked over, right? There are not that many people here. There's only 1 million of us. And so when we see that there's a group identity around the country that we can associate with, that feels seen. People feel seen by that. And so I think that the aging population for one, our economy for another, as well as this party identity is really going to come to bear.
Yeah. Do you think it's short term and then potentially we go back the other way, or is this maybe here to stay?
I think it's here to stay for at least a little while until we see what happens with the pandemic. If we continue to see increases in population in certain counties, right? Gallatin County growing, new people moving in. We don't know if those new voters are voting here, voting in a former state. But I think especially with the state house and state senate being Republican controlled, we're in it for the long haul.
Oh, I thought you were going to bring us happier news, Christina, but understandable to be sure. Now, the next topic we talk about, and this really came into view as far as the pandemic, and really has come up in 2016 and 2020. That's the confidence in the actual voting process and the ability to count the votes fairly. This is what we got out of the exit poll and some comparison there. A great deal of confidence from overall voters. Half of them felt a great deal of confidence. And you can see that's dropped by about 6%. There. When you break it down along party lines, again, it's about as you would expect. In terms of the Republicans, they were not that confident to begin with in 2016. They've dropped another 10 points here in 2020. And then for Democrats, they were more confident, but they actually had a bigger drop, 12 points to 10 points, 73% to 61%. So when it comes to this election, those topics are relevant. The results are one thing, the logistics another. Montana PBS's Brianna McCabe looks back at the past month to show us literally how Montanans voted.
Election offices countered the pandemic with expanded voting options, from drive-through ballot drop-offs to socially distanced in-person voting, and even a park-in vote in Helena, where people could register and cast a ballot from their car on Election Day. But the majority of Montanans voted early by absentee, and that was nothing new. In fact, the number of absentee voters has grown exponentially the past 2 decades, from about 10% in 2000 to a quarter of voters 10 years ago. By 2016, half. And this year, nearly 90% of registered voters voted absentee.
Thank you. You're welcome.
This year, 45 Montana counties opted to conduct mail elections, sending ballots to all registered voters, not just those on the absentee list, which turned out to be just a minor adjustment for election offices, increasing their mailing volume by about 10%.
We're really fortunate because this is not our first time processing ballots like this.
We've been running our city, school, off-time county special elections by all-mail ballot for basically 15 years. So that's not new to us. It's just the fact that it's a presidential election.
Even the 11 counties that stuck to traditional polling elections have an absentee majority, so most of their ballots were in before Election Day. In Powell County, another 15% of the people who typically go to the polls voted absentee this year.
And I don't know if it's because of the coronavirus or whatever reason, but they would come and vote early.
You can only vote once. Do it while you can, because you don't know what's tomorrow's going to happen. You might catch the COVID.
With this COVID, I wouldn't want to be standing around a lot of people waiting for what could be hours to put a vote in.
Prepaid postage made voting as accessible as the mailbox or nearest post office, and Montanans could track their ballot online to make sure it was accepted.
We have been doing absentee for years, so it was just a natural thing to do.
I guess I'm just taking faith that it's going to get there.
But across the state, counties saw just as many Montanans opting to turn in their ballots in person.
I was concerned about the post office, so I wanted to make sure that our votes got counted.
I just think the tensions behind this election, I just want to make sure that I drop it off and no one steals it.
I saw myself put it in the box. I know it's here. So now all I can do is trust the people that are running this and that everything will be all right.
Once the elections office receives a ballot, it begins a series of double checks, starting with a barcode scan, ensuring each ballot matches the voter it was assigned to. Each voter can only have one ballot assigned to them. And then election staff check each signature to make sure it matches that voter's signature on file. If it doesn't, they give the voter a chance to fix it. In counties with more than 8,000 registered voters, a new rule this year allowed poll workers to start opening envelopes the Thursday before Election Day.
So that we have ample time to open those secrecy envelopes and flatten those ballots, so that when they do get counted, they can go through that high-speed tabulator in the best method to make sure that the vote totals are as accurate as they can be on Election Day.
The ballots are sealed and kept under video surveillance on both sides of a locked vault.
Because we know how important it is that every vote gets counted and that we protect the utmost integrity with this election.
And after ballots speed through the counting machine, humans will have to review any that get kicked out for marks beyond a candidate's oval.
Buy coffee or food or buy a pen or something, accidentally, it's going to have to be manually looked at to make sure that, it's what the vote was intended.
And finally, the machine's ballot count must match the hand count precisely,
so that we don't lose track of our counts of the ones that we issued versus the ones we received versus the ones that we counted.
For Montana PBS, I'm Brianna McCabe.
Well, Christina, this is right up your alley, the research you've been doing out in the field, and not only Montana, but also Colorado and Utah. So give us an overview of what you're finding out there in the field.
Yeah, I think to go to Alex's data about the exit polls, people are fairly confident in the way that our election system works. We see in Montana this familiarity with vote by mail. Utah, tons of vote by mail there, and Colorado does all of their elections by mail. So we're seeing that election administrators are now taking the opportunity to provide easier access to the ballot for voters. That might mean putting a county satellite event somewhere so voters don't have to drive their ballot into Missoula, maybe up in Sealy Lake or something. So we're seeing around the country innovation happening in these really unexpected ways by these election administrators that most of us haven't thought that much about, right? We get our ballot, we cast it, and we don't think about what happens next.
Yeah, and Alex, I know you had some experience as well with it. You were part of a court case with the native vote. What have you seen in terms of that?
Yeah, there was been a lot of court cases this year about potential changes to some of the elections. Nationwide, a lot of them about coronavirus precautions, but about other things as well. I was part of I provided an expert report for a court case about a bill that was passed a couple of years ago that made it, that put restrictions on who can drop off a ballot for each other. And that, again, is connected to some of these other things that was justified as a way of preventing voter fraud. But we've seen that our system is actually pretty robust. There are already a lot of ways, a lot of checks, as you guys just showed. And there was just vanishingly rare evidence that voter fraud is a real issue. And so I think these poll results that we had today, there is definitely some mistrust, and it's worrying that you have 5 or 10% of people, and even more of Republicans saying they have no or next to no trust in the electoral process. But I don't think it's gotten that much worse over the past 4 years, and in some ways that's good because we've been seeing this very high-profile messaging that this is a scam and it's cheating. And I'm somewhat reassured that people are actually, they know their election officials. These are often people who work in counties. We know these people. They work hard. They do their best. And I think we're lucky that we have such a robust process.
Yeah, well, Montana certainly acquitted themselves well in this process. Now it's to my favorite part of the show, which is how much we don't like the media. So let's talk about the trust in media exit polling question. Overall, as you can see, always most of the time combining for about a third of that and some of the time in the middle. But when you get into the breakdown along party lines, then you see the stark contrast. This definitely feeds the narrative in terms of liberally biased media, as Republicans, astonishingly only 6% at the top there, and fully 1/3 of Republicans in this exit polling say they never trust the media to report the news fairly. Democrats a little bit better there, and most of the time well over half for that. So that one hardly shocking, I guess, if we're looking at that. And has that really, Alex, have you found that changed from 4 years ago to this year?
That's got a bit worse over the past couple of years, but not a ton. This is one of these paradoxical questions. We ask this, we want to try and understand how people are feeling, but the results that people give, there is something weird about saying you don't trust the media when actually most of the way that we're getting these messages about politics are through the media. So a lot of these messages about how you shouldn't trust the media are coming through the media. So there is something paradoxical, and I think what's going on again is that people are thinking of themselves as having picked a side. And my side says media bad, your side says media good. And so you get people, it seems a bit more like a justification of their attitudes rather than these kind of underlying actual view on what's going on in the media.
Well, if we got a chance to rough up the media a little bit, then I have to take an opportunity to talk about polling, because the two of you have been out in the field working, doing polling work over the years. So these last two presidential cycles have been brutal. Skepticism at an all-time high as it continues to feel like it's not been accurate. So Christina, where do you see the state of polling right now in Montana and nationally?
Well, I think just to start with Montana, we're an interesting state to think about polling, and I think nationally we've seen this urban-rural conversation happening in our politics, and I'm not sure there's a really great method for polling in rural places. We don't have a lot of people, and we're trying to figure that out. I also think the polling story, we really need to think about the idea that people aren't answering their phones. I don't know about you, but I got phone calls every single day from different people asking opinions for internal polling for their candidates. And so we need to be thinking about other ways to meet people where they are, online panels, or even focus groups to really hear what people will say, what they think, what they believe with people that have, similar values to their own.
Yeah. Alex, what's your experience been?
Yeah, my sense is that we have a decent sense of why polling is a bit off. And it's because some people are harder to reach, but it's stronger than that. There's actually people who think of polling as part of, that's the enemy, right? Like these are liberal organizations often, or seen as liberal organizations that are running the polls. They're getting political messages that these are all skewed, these are all biased. And so if you're actually thinking of that as something you really shouldn't be talking to, then no wonder we have a hard time getting good responses. I don't think that's easy to fix. I do think, though, that I'm going to turn this around and say I think we, the public, are part of the problem with this. I think we use polls almost like a sport, like a spectator sport. And that's part of the demand for polling. That's why there's so much of it. But that's not really a very useful way to use this. Like, you can learn things from polls, but trying to just use it as a spectator sport, my side's winning, yay, boo, I think that's on us for demanding that, and that if we actually demanded higher quality polls, they'd be more expensive, there'd be fewer of them, but I do think we could learn more about the electorate, and I think that's important.
Well, we'll see if that trend continues. We're just about to wrap things up for this evening. We wanted to get a final thought from both Christina and Alex. A word about this 2020 election cycle and how you felt like it, in a summary, how it came out.
Well, I like to research election administrators, and we haven't talked about them as much as we have this year since 2000, right? So now we're finally seeing these, untold stories about these public servants reaching, viewers across the country and listening to stories about these folks, and maybe we'll have re-energization into the public service.
Alex, the 2020 cycle for you and all that's come with it.
Yeah, one of the big questions I get is about political division, because we're clearly seeing this. We also had a question on our survey, what is the biggest issue facing the country? The most common response, it was an open-ended response, they could say whatever they want. The most common response was political division. What are we going to do about that? Is there anything we can do about that? The truth is, our political system is not set up super well to deal with political division. If you have divided government, you're just going to get nothing done with political division. What can we do about that? I think we should, again, take it on ourselves to say, in my community, I can do good. I can talk to people. I have to treat people as people. I can support the organizations I believe in. And I think that kind of lower level, more humble version of politics, I think we all can do good in our communities through that. And that we don't have to wait on national level political division to heal itself for us to do good in our day-to-day lives.
Well, Alex, I appreciate your thoughts. Christina as well, great insight into everything that's happened in this 2020 election. And of course, we have to give great thanks to all the Montanans who participated in this process in record numbers. Congratulations to you as well. From all of us here at Montana PBS, thank you for joining us tonight, and good night.
Production support was provided by the Greater Montana Foundation, encouraging communication on issues, trends, and values of importance to Montanans.
It's more than just a building.
There's something nostalgic about American barns.
You're standing in a piece of history, and you can just look up and be in amazement and awe of the work those people did back then.
I would love to be able to sit down and have the walls tell you stories, because there's less and less places like this.
During the last measurable decade, more than 2,000 barns came down.
We had to make a choice. Do we let the barn go, or do we restore it? Do we save it?
This is the story of a farm family deciding what to do with their barn.
It'd be kind of like an organ. If you took the barn away, you'd be missing an organ. You'd be missing a key part of the place.
But maintaining their historic barn is not an easy chore.
Where there's moisture, there's usually damage, so the holes were bigger than I thought.
For what this is costing, it's too much.
The concern is growing.
There is a window that works, and it needs to be done, period.
Keeping the barn.
Monday evening at 8.
Why should young people care about the spread of coronavirus? Well, we know that people with underlying medical conditions over the age of 60 are at highest risk, but they've got to get it from somebody.
So we're asking everyone to be selfless for others so that we can protect those who are most susceptible.
Not going to bars, not going to restaurants. It all just means physical separation so that you have a space between you and others.
For more information on how you can social distance, please go to coronavirus.gov.